It all started on a bright afternoon in Washington, D.C., during what was supposed to be a routine press briefing. Karoline Leavitt, the press secretary, stepped up to the podium, ready to address the country with the usual updates about the government. But this briefing wasn't like any other. What Leavitt said during that moment would soon cause waves that no one could have predicted. Karoline had always been known for her bold and sometimes controversial statements. She was never one to shy away from speaking her mind, especially when it came to issues she felt strongly about. This time, however, she made a remark that shocked everyone. In response to a question about the current political climate, Leavitt commented on the actions and opinions of Representative Jasmine Crockett, a rising star in the Democratic Party. With a tone of frustration, Leavitt said that Crockett's recent statements were un-American, implying that Crockett was pushing an agenda that was contrary to the interests of the United States. The words, though delivered in a calm voice, hit hard. It wasn't just the content of the statement that caught everyone's attention, but the sheer boldness of it. Leavitt had publicly criticized a sitting member of Congress in such a direct and harsh way. In a political world where words were carefully chosen and measured, this was an unusually blunt attack. As soon as the statement was made, it quickly spread like wildfire across social media platforms. The clip of Leavitt's comment was shared thousands of times, and within minutes it became a trending topic. People from all sides of the political spectrum weighed in. Some agreed with Leavitt, arguing that Crockett's policies were indeed damaging to the nation. Others, however, felt that Leavitt had gone too far, suggesting that her comment was not only unfair, but also unprofessional. Representative Jasmine Crockett, known for her fiery passion and strong belief in her principles, wasn't going to let the comment slide. She was well aware that politics was a rough game, but this was different. The idea of being accused of being un-American was something she simply could not ignore. She had worked too hard to get to where she was to let anyone, especially someone in such a high position of power, question her loyalty to her country. As the comment spread, Crockett's supporters quickly rallied behind her. Social media platforms were flooded with messages of support. Hashtags like Jagang Stand with Crockett and Jagang Un-American comments quickly went viral. People shared their own experiences of how they disagreed with Crockett's political views, but still respected her right to hold them. The comment from Leavitt became the focal point of a much larger debate. The news outlets picked up the story the following morning, with headlines blasting Leavitt's comment. Political analysts discussed the implications of such a statement, considering the fact that Leavitt, as press secretary, was in a position of great influence. Some people said it was a sign of a new, more aggressive political climate where people would no longer hold back their opinions. Others feared it was a dangerous step towards further polarization in an already divided country. Even though Leavitt's words were meant to criticize Crockett's political stance, many believed the timing was suspect. The comment came just days after a particularly heated debate in Congress, where Crockett had stood firm on her position regarding immigration reform. Some wondered if Leavitt's comment was politically motivated, perhaps an attempt to discredit a growing political rival. After all, Crockett's star was rising, and she had quickly gained a loyal base of supporters, especially among younger voters. But for now, the focus was on Leavitt and her words. As the hours passed, the comment continued to dominate news coverage. Talk shows, radio programs, and podcasts were filled with debates about whether Leavitt's statement had crossed a line. People began to wonder if this was simply the start of a long-standing rivalry between the two women. For Rep. Crockett, the moment was more than just a political attack. It was personal. She had always prided herself on her commitment to the values she held dear. She was a voice for those who felt unheard, and she had spent years working hard to earn the trust of her constituents. Now, to have someone in such a high position suggest that she was un-American felt like an insult not just to her, but to everyone who had supported her. However, Crockett wasn't one to back down. She knew that the road ahead would be tough, but this was a fight she was ready to face. In the days that followed, she began to make her own statements, responding to the accusations with calm but firm words. She pointed out the importance of maintaining a respectful and constructive dialogue in politics, even when there were deep disagreements. Though the initial wave of support from her followers was heartening, Crockett understood that the battle was far from over. She had always known that politics was a battleground, but this was different. The stakes were higher now, and she had a feeling that this moment would change the course of her career. At the same time, Karoline Leavitt found herself at the center of a storm of criticism. People began to question not only the content of her statement, but also the role she played as press secretary. Was it appropriate for someone in her position to make such a direct attack on a member of Congress? Could she be seen as impartial when it came to matters of politics? As the controversy unfolded, the question of whether Leavitt's comments were in line with her duties became a focal point of discussion. The media continued to scrutinize the situation, but Crockett and Leavitt remained at the heart of it. With each passing day, the situation seemed to get more heated, and both women were bracing for what would come next. As tensions grew, it became clear that this wasn't just a simple dispute. It was the beginning of something bigger, something that would define the political landscape for months to come. The world watched as two strong political figures stood on opposite sides of a divide that seemed to be widening by the hour. The spark of controversy that had started with one brief remark had ignited a fire that neither side was willing to let burn out, and no one knew just how far the flames would spread. As the days passed after Karoline Leavitt's bold statement about Jasmine Crockett, the political landscape in Washington, D.C., began to shift. The comment, which many had expected to fade away with time, continued to linger in the public eye. The media had kept the story alive, and social media platforms were filled with back-and-forth debates between Crockett's supporters and those who agreed with Leavitt's critique. However, what no one saw coming was Crockett's next move. It was a move that would change everything, pushing this already controversial situation to new heights. One afternoon, just a few days after Leavitt's press briefing, Jasmine Crockett held a press conference of her own. The room was filled with reporters and cameras, all eager to hear what she would say in response to the growing controversy. Crockett walked up to the microphone with a calm demeanor, though the seriousness in her eyes was evident. She didn't waste time on pleasantries. She went straight to the point, announcing her decision to take legal action against Karoline Leavitt for defamation. The announcement hit hard. For many, it was a complete shock. Politicians often exchanged harsh words in public, but the idea of taking such a public dispute to the courts was rare. In fact, it was almost unheard of in today's political climate. Defamation lawsuits were typically reserved for private individuals, not high-profile figures in the public eye. But Crockett's decision was bold, and it sent a clear message. She wasn't going to let the accusations slide. In her statement, Crockett explained that Leavitt's comment, calling her un-American, was not just an insult. It was an attack on her character and integrity. "I have dedicated my life to public service," Crockett said, her voice steady but filled with conviction. "I have worked tirelessly to fight for my constituents and for the values that I believe make this country great. For someone to question my loyalty to this nation based on nothing more than political differences is not only unfair, it is damaging to my reputation and my career." Crockett's legal team wasted no time in filing the lawsuit, demanding $80 million in damages. The figure was substantial, but it wasn't just about the money. It was a statement of how serious she was about defending her name. Crockett's lawyers argued that Leavitt's comment had caused her significant harm, both personally and professionally. It was not just the emotional distress of being called un-American, but the very real consequences such a statement could have on her ability to do her job and serve her constituents. While some of Crockett's supporters cheered her on, calling her a champion for standing up to Leavitt's baseless attack, others were less enthusiastic. Some questioned whether a lawsuit was the best response to the situation. Was this a politically motivated move, designed to turn the tables on Leavitt and shift the conversation away from the original issue? Others wondered if Crockett's decision would have any real impact, considering the fact that defamation cases involving public figures were often difficult to win. Meanwhile, Leavitt herself remained quiet in the days following Crockett's announcement. For a while, there was no public response from the press secretary. Some speculated that Leavitt was stunned by the lawsuit and needed time to process the situation. Others thought she might be strategizing on how best to handle the mounting pressure. Regardless, the silence only added to the drama of the situation, leaving people to wonder what would come next. As the legal battle began to unfold, both sides started preparing for what promised to be a long and complicated case. Crockett's team focused on gathering evidence that would support their claims of defamation. They reached out to political analysts, media experts, and even colleagues within Congress to testify on her behalf. They needed to prove that Leavitt's statement was not only false but harmful. It wasn't just about defending Crockett's character. It was about sending a message that political leaders couldn't just make reckless accusations without facing consequences. On the other side, Leavitt's legal team began to prepare their defense. They argued that Leavitt's statement was a form of free speech, a right protected by the First Amendment. They also pointed out that, as a press secretary, Leavitt was entitled to voice her opinions on the actions and statements of public figures. They claimed that her comments were not meant to harm Crockett personally, but to criticize her political views. It was a classic case of political disagreement, they argued, and in the world of politics, such comments were commonplace. The media continued to cover the unfolding lawsuit. Both sides were pushed further into the spotlight. The public was captivated by the drama, eagerly awaiting the next move. The stakes seemed to get higher with each passing day. What began as a simple disagreement had quickly escalated into a full-blown legal battle, with each side determined to come out on top. For Crockett, this lawsuit was more than just a legal matter. It was a chance to defend her values and principles. She had always believed in the importance of standing up for what was right, and she wasn't about to let this personal attack go unchallenged. She knew that, as a public figure, her reputation was everything. If Leavitt's comment was allowed to stand without consequence, it would set a dangerous precedent for future political discourse. But the case was also deeply personal for her. Crockett had worked hard to build her career, and she had earned her place in Congress through dedication and hard work. Being called un-American was not just an attack on her political beliefs, it was an attack on her very identity. She had always prided herself on her patriotism and love for her country, and to have that questioned in such a public and damaging way was something she could not ignore. As the legal proceedings got underway, the case began to attract attention from all corners of the country. Political commentators discussed the implications of the lawsuit on news programs, and social media continued to buzz with opinions from both sides. Some people felt that the lawsuit was a necessary step in defending free speech, while others saw it as an attempt to silence criticism. The debate grew more intense, and the lines between supporters of Crockett and Leavitt grew even more clearly drawn. At the heart of the legal drama was a fundamental question: how far should political leaders be allowed to go in their criticism of one another? Was Leavitt's comment simply a form of political discourse, or had she crossed a line by making a personal attack on Crockett's character? The case was not just about two women in politics. It was about the larger question of how we handle disagreements in the public sphere. As the first round of legal battles began to play out, it was clear that this was just the beginning of what promised to be a long and complicated journey. Neither side seemed willing to back down, and the public's interest in the case only grew as each new twist and turn unfolded. In the world of politics, where every move is scrutinized and every word analyzed, this lawsuit was shaping up to be one of the most high-profile legal battles in recent memory. For now, both Jasmine Crockett and Karoline Leavitt were bracing for what came next, knowing that this legal battle would define their careers in ways no one could have predicted. As news of Reverend Jasmine Crockett's defamation lawsuit against Karoline Leavitt spread across the media, the political world found itself gripped by an intense wave of reactions. What had started as a public disagreement between two women in Washington had quickly spiraled into a national controversy. The public fallout was immediate, with both sides of the political spectrum taking to social media, news outlets, and talk shows to voice their opinions. For many, the news was a shock. The idea that a sitting U.S. representative and a press secretary could be involved in such a high-profile legal battle was something few had seen before. This wasn't just about policy differences or political disagreements. This was personal. Leavitt's comment had struck a nerve with Crockett, and now the two women were locked in a fierce struggle for their reputations. And as the story gained momentum, it was clear that the public wasn't going to let it fade away anytime soon. On one side, Crockett's supporters rallied behind her, echoing her belief that Leavitt's comment had been not just unfair, but deeply damaging. Many pointed to Crockett's long-standing commitment to public service, emphasizing that her dedication to her constituents should not be questioned based on political disagreements. They argued that Leavitt, as a press secretary, had a responsibility to set a higher standard when it came to public discourse. It wasn't just about criticizing Crockett's policies. It was about attacking her integrity and patriotism in a way that no public official should ever do. Social media was buzzing with hashtags like "Your Support Crockett" and "Justice for Crockett" as people shared their thoughts, experiences, and reasons for supporting the Congresswoman. Some even posted photos of themselves holding signs or participating in online campaigns, expressing solidarity with her cause. For many, this wasn't just about politics. It was about standing up for a person they believed had been unfairly attacked. But as much as Crockett's supporters had made their voices heard, the backlash against her lawsuit was just as strong. Leavitt's defenders were quick to point out that her comment, while harsh, was not meant to destroy Crockett personally. Instead, they argued that it was simply a criticism of her political views, which were seen by some as extreme or out of touch with the needs of the country. In their view, Leavitt had every right to express her opinion, especially considering that Crockett had been vocal in her own right about her political beliefs. Those who supported Leavitt felt that the lawsuit was an overreaction. They believed that Crockett's decision to pursue legal action was an attempt to silence legitimate criticism and to shift the public conversation away from the substance of her policies. Instead of responding with a counter-argument or a policy debate, Crockett had opted for a lawsuit, which some saw as a tactic to avoid addressing the real issues at hand. The media was divided as well. Some outlets sided with Crockett, framing her as the victim of an unfair personal attack. They emphasized how Leavitt's words could hurt her ability to do her job, especially in a polarized political environment. Others, however, questioned whether the lawsuit was an attempt to turn a political dispute into a legal victory. They wondered whether Crockett was using the legal system to deflect attention from the real debate about her policies. As the story unfolded, even some of Crockett's own colleagues in Congress began to weigh in. Some voiced their support for her, praising her decision to stand up for herself. Others were more cautious, urging both sides to find a way to resolve the situation without escalating it further. There was concern that the lawsuit could distract from more important legislative work, especially as the country faced a number of pressing issues that required attention. The controversy began to take on a life of its own, as commentators and political analysts debated whether Crockett's decision would have long-term consequences for her career. Would the public see her as a brave defender of her reputation, or would they view her as someone who couldn't handle tough political criticism? Would the lawsuit hurt her standing in the Democratic Party, or would it make her a hero for standing up to an unfair attack? In Leavitt's camp, the pressure was also mounting. While she had initially kept quiet after Crockett's legal announcement, the silence was becoming increasingly hard to maintain. Media outlets began to call for her to address the situation more directly. There were whispers that Leavitt was under intense pressure from those within the administration to respond. And soon, the longer she stayed silent, the more it seemed as if she was hiding from the controversy. Finally, after a few days of speculation and media pressure, Leavitt broke her silence. In a carefully crafted statement, she expressed regret for her comment and attempted to clarify her intentions. She explained that she never meant to attack Crockett personally, but instead was reacting to what she saw as dangerous political ideas. She reiterated her belief that public figures should be held accountable for their actions and words, but she also acknowledged that the choice of words could have been more measured. Leavitt's statement didn't sit well with everyone. Some felt that it was too little, too late. They believed that her regret didn't go far enough in addressing the real harm caused by her comments. Others saw it as a necessary step toward healing the rift between the two women. It was clear that Leavitt was trying to walk a fine line. She needed to apologize without admitting that her criticism was completely unfounded. For Crockett, Leavitt's apology wasn't enough. She stood firm in her decision to continue the lawsuit, stating that words alone couldn't undo the damage caused. Crockett felt that the apology, while appreciated, didn't change the fact that Leavitt's comment had been damaging in the first place. For her, the legal path was the only way to hold Leavitt accountable. The public fallout had now fully escalated into a battle of words, lawsuits, and public statements. Both women were facing mounting pressure, and the eyes of the country were on them. It was no longer just about the initial comment. It was about who could stand the pressure and emerge victorious. As the legal proceedings continued, both sides dug in their heels, prepared for what could be a long and bitter fight. The impact of the lawsuit was far-reaching. It was now a symbol of the growing divide in American politics, where personal attacks and legal battles seemed to be replacing civil discourse. The political climate, once one of debate and discussion, had turned into one of conflict and confrontation. The consequences of this fallout were still unclear, but one thing was certain. It wasn't just Crockett and Leavitt who were affected. The entire political landscape was being shaped by this high-profile legal battle, and no one knew where it would lead. As the days passed and the legal battle between Representative Jasmine Crockett and Karoline Leavitt seemed to gain more momentum, the situation reached a point where both women felt the weight of the public's scrutiny. The eyes of the nation were fixed on them, and every word they said was analyzed, critiqued, and debated by millions. As the conflict grew more intense, there were increasing calls from various political analysts, pundits, and even some of their colleagues to find a way to resolve the situation before it spiraled out of control. The public was growing weary of the back-and-forth legal drama, and there was a strong desire for both women to find common ground. Amid this growing pressure, Karoline Leavitt, who had remained mostly silent during the early days of the lawsuit, finally decided to take a more proactive approach. She recognized that her initial response, leaving the issue unaddressed for several days, had only fueled the fire. The silence, though strategic in some ways, had allowed the situation to fester. Now, with public opinion swinging in unexpected directions, Leavitt knew that it was time to make a statement that could shift the course of the conversation. Leavitt, in a carefully prepared address, took to social media and the press to offer a direct plea for resolution. "I never intended for things to escalate to this point," she began in a calm but earnest tone. "The political environment today is more divided than ever, and I deeply regret that my words have caused such distress. It was never my intention to attack Representative Crockett personally, but rather to express concern over policies I strongly disagree with. In the heat of the moment, I spoke without thinking, and for that I sincerely apologize." The apology wasn't just about expressing regret for the words she had used. It was also an attempt to appeal to the broader public that had grown increasingly frustrated with the entire situation. Leavitt continued, "We as public figures have a responsibility to model respectful dialogue, even when we have disagreements. I take full responsibility for the impact my words have had, and understand that my comments crossed a line. I do not wish to see this become a distraction from the important work we have to do in Congress. We must come together and focus on solving the issues facing our nation." Leavitt's words were soft, but her message was clear. She was asking for a resolution. She was urging Crockett to consider dropping the lawsuit and moving forward with the goal of putting the country's needs above their personal dispute. Leavitt recognized that continuing the legal battle would only deepen the divide, and she hoped that Crockett, with her own strong principles, would agree that it was time to end the drama and focus on more pressing matters. The reaction to Leavitt's apology was mixed. Some praised her for stepping up and showing maturity in admitting her mistake. They felt that it took courage to publicly acknowledge when one was wrong, especially when so much was at stake. For some, this apology softened the image of Leavitt, making her appear more human, more relatable. They saw her as someone who could admit fault and move on. and they believed this was a good sign for the future of her political career. Others, however, were not so quick to forgive. They felt that Leavitt's apology was a little too late. Crockett's supporters, in particular, were skeptical. They had been hurt by Leavitt's initial comments, and many felt that a simple apology couldn't erase the damage that had been done. Words like un-American can't just be taken back, one supporter commented online. It wasn't just a mistake. It was a deliberate attempt to undermine Crockett's integrity. She's already filed the lawsuit. Why would she drop it now? Indeed, for Crockett, the situation was not so easily resolved. While she acknowledged Leavitt's apology, it didn't change the fact that her reputation had already been damaged. The legal action, as far as she was concerned, was necessary to ensure that such attacks did not go unchecked. For Crockett, the apology felt like a step in the right direction, but it wasn't enough to undo the harm that had been caused. Crockett's response to Leavitt's plea was measured but firm. She issued a statement in which she acknowledged the apology, but emphasized that her decision to pursue the lawsuit was about more than just personal offense. It was about setting a standard for political discourse. "This is not just about me," Crockett said. "This is about making sure that the next person who stands up for what they believe in isn't silenced by an unfair personal attack. Our words have consequences, and we can't just brush that aside with an apology." She also pointed out that the lawsuit was not driven by her desire for revenge or money, but by the need to protect the integrity of the political process. "If we allow these kinds of attacks to go unchallenged, then we are encouraging a toxic environment where public figures can say anything without consequences. I will not let that happen. I will stand firm, not just for myself, but for the future of our country's political discourse." As the media continued to cover the ongoing saga, the question on everyone's mind was whether this conflict could be resolved or whether it would continue to escalate. Some speculated that Crockett might ultimately accept Leavitt's apology and drop the lawsuit. After all, many people felt that the lawsuit was doing more harm than good to both women's reputations. Others believed that Crockett, having come this far, wouldn't back down easily. Behind closed doors, both sides were under immense pressure. Political leaders from both parties began to weigh in, with some advising Crockett to take the high road and drop the lawsuit, while others encouraged her to stay the course and hold Leavitt accountable. Some of Crockett's allies even warned her that dropping the lawsuit might appear as though she was backing down, which could affect her credibility in the long term. For Leavitt, there were whispers that her apology was part of a broader strategy to salvage her political career. Her once steady rise in the press secretary position now seemed uncertain. If she didn't manage to resolve the situation with Crockett, she risked damaging her own reputation permanently. Political commentators noted that public opinion could easily turn against her if she was perceived as being insincere or unwilling to make amends. In the midst of all the noise, one thing was certain. Both women had become symbols of a much larger issue in American politics, the growing division and the increasing polarization between opposing political sides. The way this situation was handled could set a precedent for future conflicts in the political arena, and neither Crockett nor Leavitt wanted to be the one to come out on the losing end. Though the legal battle was far from over, the public plea for resolution showed that both women were aware of the bigger picture. They knew that the longer this dispute continued, the more it would overshadow their political work, and the more it would harm their public images. The world was watching, and both were trying to figure out how best to navigate the complex political and personal dynamics at play. The courtroom lights were bright, the cameras clicked, and the whole nation waited. What had begun as one comment during a press briefing had now become one of the most talked about political events of the year. The lawsuit between Representative Jasmine Crockett and Press Secretary Karoline Leavitt had not only made headlines, but it had also started countless discussions in homes, schools, workplaces, and even in Congress itself. People were no longer just watching two political figures disagree. They were watching a moment that could shape the future of how public speech and accountability worked in politics. Even though Leavitt had already made a public plea for peace and offered an apology, the lawsuit still stood firm. Crockett had chosen to continue forward with the case, To her, the damage had already been done. The comment calling her un-American had affected her deeply, not just emotionally, but also in how others viewed her as a leader. She believed the best way to stand up for herself and others in similar situations was to carry on with the legal process. The courtroom sessions attracted massive attention. News outlets covered every detail. People watched as legal teams presented their arguments, bringing forward witnesses, documents, and past statements. Crockett's side focused on the idea that words, especially those spoken by public leaders, have power. They argued that Leavitt's comment was not just political criticism, but a personal attack that damaged Crockett's reputation and questioned her values as a citizen and a representative. Leavitt's legal team, on the other hand, stood firmly by the idea of freedom of speech. They said that criticizing a politician's ideas, even strongly, was a part of the democratic process. They reminded the court and the public that Leavitt's job as press secretary involved speaking for the administration and responding to national conversations. While her choice of words may have been poor, they claimed it wasn't illegal or deserving of an $80 million lawsuit. As the trial went on, Americans began to think more deeply about the issue. Was this case just about one woman being called a name? Or was it about something bigger, like setting new boundaries in how politicians and public servants communicate? Some people started reflecting on the political environment as a whole. Many agreed that discussions had become too harsh in recent years. The focus seemed to shift from solving problems to attacking opponents. Others said this case was an important reminder that words have real consequences, especially when spoken by those in positions of influence. While the public watched and debated, both Crockett and Leavitt stayed focused. Crockett continued attending congressional meetings, standing by her beliefs and talking about the importance of respect in public service. Leavitt, though often seen as quiet since her apology, began speaking more carefully in press briefings. She worked hard to regain trust and present herself as someone who had learned a valuable lesson from the experience. Behind the scenes, both women were also reflecting on how far things had gone. Leavitt was known to have spoken with close colleagues about the stress and unexpected intensity of the situation. She admitted she had underestimated how much impact her words could have, especially in today's digital age, where a single sentence can be shared across the world in seconds. Crockett, too, was feeling the weight. While she believed in what she was fighting for, the constant attention, court appearances, and interviews had taken a toll on her. There were moments when she wondered whether the fight was worth it, but each time she reminded herself of the bigger picture, standing up for dignity and fairness in politics. Eventually, the trial reached its final days. The courtroom was filled with reporters, legal experts, and supporters from both sides. Everyone was eager to hear the outcome, but even more, they were curious to see what kind of message the decision would send. Would it support the idea that free speech must include responsibility? Or would it suggest that political disagreements, no matter how sharp, should always be protected? In the end, the judge made a carefully worded decision. The court acknowledged that Leavitt's words were strong and had caused pain. However, the judge also explained that in a democratic society, speech, especially political speech, is highly protected. While the court did not award the full damages Crockett requested, it did issue a formal statement encouraging public figures to speak with care and respect. The decision didn't fully satisfy either side, but it also didn't leave them completely disappointed. For Crockett, the statement from the court was a form of moral victory. Though she didn't win the full legal case, the acknowledgement that the words had caused harm mattered to her. She later told the press that this was never just about money. It was about awareness, about standing up when it mattered, and about making sure people understood that language, especially from leaders, carries weight. Leavitt, meanwhile, took the outcome as a sign to move forward. She accepted the court's words and said she was committed to speaking more thoughtfully in the future. She also expressed hope that her mistake could be a lesson for others in public service. "I'm not perfect," she said during a press briefing, "but I can learn, and I can grow. I hope this chapter helps bring more kindness and understanding to our political world." After the trial, both women returned to their roles. though with a slightly different outlook. They had gone through a storm together, one that neither had expected, but both had endured. Though they never became allies, there was a quiet respect between them. They had both stood their ground, spoken their truth, and walked away having learned something. In time, the public's attention shifted to other stories, other challenges, and new political developments. But the lessons from the Crockett-Leavitt case remained in the minds of many. It had become a story about accountability, responsibility, and how public figures should handle their words. It had also become a reminder that even in disagreement, there is room for learning, growth, and understanding. And so, what started as a controversial comment ended as a powerful example. It showed that mistakes can lead to reflection, that disagreement doesn't have to lead to disrespect, and most importantly, that the future of politics doesn't have to be shaped by division, but by the courage to face difficult moments with dignity.